My name is Rob Dale. I'm one of the coaches here at Rhapsody Strategies, along with a number of other coaches that are here live on the call. We've got, of course, Eric and Trevor, who are going to be really facilitating and going through the conversation with me. Catherine and Steve will jump in. We encourage you guys to jump in with some insight as well, and to really hear from you. And we've been doing these webinars. We really kind of launched this whole thought of doing the webinars a number of years ago, and did them throughout most of the last couple of years, decided to take a little bit of a break, and we're just kickstarting them again now, recognizing that there are some challenges and some issues that all of us as business owners and leaders face, and how can we just have a conversation around some of those topics, hopefully provide some insight and some resources and some answers, some solutions, some best practices, if you will, that everybody can utilize within their own organization. We were originally going to cover a completely different topic, and it was only just a few weeks ago where we were starting to see over the course of the last month and a half, in a lot of our coaching conversations, this topic of engagement, of motivation, of developing and strengthening teams, of finding and keeping the right employees, it really had become center stage with so many of our coaching clients that we thought it made sense to make a shift in our topic today and to really dive in on how we do this well. And I love how we, the title of this notion of, because the question I probably get the most right now is, how do I get my team to engage? And I love how we, Trevor, who does a lot of our marketing and frames things, and as he put the wording in there, you can't. And that's the end of the story. So thank you very much and appreciate that you joined us today, and good luck. Okay, maybe we can unpack a little bit more around the idea of, okay, if we can't, why is that good news? Right. And it is good news. And so we really want to take a look at how we develop and create an environment in which team members, employees can choose to be engaged. And that is really going to be a bit of the topic that we're going to be talking about. But maybe, Eric, I'm going to start with you, and I want to jump to both Eric and to Trevor, just with some opening thoughts around what are you hearing as you talk to your clients, as you're interacting with different business leaders. What are the challenges, some of the pain points, some of the difficulties that they're facing right now?
Well, I mean, let's start with context, right? I mean, finding and keeping the right people has been one of the top 3 pain points we've been hearing for over a decade as we work with different organizations and teams. And leave the pandemic out of it, even before COVID, that was a serious issue for a lot of leaders. Never mind engagement, just finding them and keeping them, right, was a challenge. And then COVID comes along and changes the game for everybody. Now we have the line being drawn in the sand between organizations that are holding to their guns to bring their people back 100% to the office, and others that are saying, nah, you never need to come back if you don't want to, and you can stay in this configuration, to everything in between. And we're watching it in the news, right? I think it was Elon Musk who drew a line in the sand most recently with his organization. It's a real issue. It's a real issue right now. How do we do team? How do we build culture in this new environment? As things are beginning to open up again, the reality is that the vast majority of the workforce, those in roles where they were sent home to work, we understand there's a lot of jobs where people couldn't work from home. They had to stay on the front lines. But for those that were sent home, they, over the last 2.5 years, have redefined their relationship with work. They have redefined their relationship with your organization. They have reorganized their lives around, in many cases, around remote work. And we're seeing, as organizations are trying to kind of call them back, a lot of folks are saying no. Right. Even pre-COVID, the whole notion, let me just introduce this other notion of what's been called the end of leadership, where at this time in history, human history, leaders have less power now than they've ever had at any point in human history, and followers have more power than they've ever had. And I think COVID has only accelerated that and accentuated that. And so the currency that leaders use to engage with their people has to be radically different. So some of the things we did before will continue to work. That's the good news, right? Like, this isn't rocket science, but I think it's a very confusing time, very frustrating time for both owners, employees, leaders, managers, as we try to renegotiate in this new reality.
It really is. It right now we're seeing it, as you said, and then I think you really gave that context well as to list out a number of the issues and the challenges that we're having. By the way, we're having a bit of a challenge right now where I know that our Facebook Live it may or may not be working. We're getting some messages. So I know, Trevor, you're kind of diving in, trying to fix that. So I know whether or not you were hearing all of what Eric kind of unpacked there a little bit. You can jump in. Perfect. I know you're a master of being able to do multiple things at the same time.
I hang on every word that Eric shares. So
exactly.
I'm not letting any of them go by.
Oh, he doesn't.
Not always. It's true. What are we seeing right now? We're seeing a lot of fear. A lot of fear in the marketplace around when it comes to an HR side. So whether it comes to acquisition or retention, both of those are huge issues right now. We've seen the economic shift dramatically around what people are expecting in terms of their pay and what can be offered for them as well, at levels most of us have never seen before. And so that all on its own, you've got organizations struggling to meet the pay expectations, let alone, as Eric described, the contextual factors that people are looking for, right? So we send people home in the pandemic. It was a tactical response. The thing is, we didn't know they were going to stay home. And then they've kind of made that business decision for a lot of organizations, saying, yeah, no, I'm good here. I'm good here. And if not, there's a super hot workplace or job market right now, and I'll go explore that. So it's a brand new dynamic from that perspective. But in the midst of it, it's all organizations that have gone through all this chaos of COVID. So many have really taken some hits financially in terms of productivity, all of those kinds of things, quite rationally and reasonably. The challenge now is people are saying, well, okay, how do we get back up and running? Right? How do we get things back to normal? And they think they're going back to something and they're not. And that's part of the reality check that has to happen, is some of these things are permanent. And we need to accept and embrace those as quickly as possible so that we can understand them and then integrate them and turn them into strategic advantages. So this tactical response of, hey, everybody, do you have a laptop? Could you do this at home? Was basically how it went. As COVID arose, we need to now turn it into something strategic where it's actually giving us real value in terms of how we operate, who we attract, how we function, our cost structure, whatever that's going to be. But in the midst of all of this, it's going to rely on these people, right? As always. So having them fully engaged, and that's language we hear all the time, or motivated or plugged in or whatever language we want to use. But basically, I think what people are trying to say is that people are present, they're working, they're active, they're collaborating, they're getting things done, they're moving the organization forward. And, in this context where people are tired and worn out and stressed and, redefining their relationship. They got questions in front of them that they haven't entertained before. It's a time where, there's fear of pushing too hard, right? If we push too hard, we lose them. And if we lose them, it's really hard to replace them.
Right. There's even been tons of articles in the news about organizations that are actually keeping people just for the sake of keeping them, like underperforming employees, like not firing anyone, because they're hard to replace. In my neighborhood alone, just the local strip mall where the Metro is, 3 restaurants that have gone out of business because they can't staff them, right? They can't find people, and that's just in one industry. It truly has become an employee's market right now, and that's making it really tough on organizations. Right, from a recruitment and a retention perspective. And then we've got the recession. We got a looming recession where we need teams to be performing like at their best. And yet they're, as Trevor just mentioned, teams have been stretched thin. Like people are right, they're running on fumes, a lot of them. So it's a very serious issue, and an issue that leaders need to take very seriously. But again, there's good news. There's ways to do this. There are tactics and strategies that can be used, but one has to be really mindful about the context we find ourselves in and adjust accordingly.
I think one last thought around the context before we start to talk about kind of just some of the things we might be able to do and what can happen as we develop and create an environment where motivation or engagement can happen is we talk about, and it was mentioned a little bit earlier about everybody wants to get back to normal, or we're trying to figure out what new normal is. And we really are in a season where we have to shift the language and expectations around what we expect from staff and how it's delivered. I was just with a client earlier today, and again, they talked about the notion of even how when they're referencing having conversations with clients or with staff, they've got staff that are constantly, they keep their name out. They've got they're comfortable in keeping their resume posted in a job search thing, even while they're working the job, knowing that that the owner's going to see it there. And their response is just, I'm just keeping my options open. And what do you say in that moment, right? Like they really do have that opportunity to do that. Shifting the language and creating an environment in which people become and choose to become engaged is really what we're going to be talking about today. Recognizing that all of these things that we're dealing with, here's the good news, we're all dealing with them.
Right.
These are not unique to industry. These are not unique to, particular parts of the job force, whether blue collar, it doesn't matter the role, the kind of company that you're with, the challenges and the pressures and the issues, the concerns, the context, I think is the same pretty well across the board. And then where do we go from here? So maybe let's start to just talk about, and maybe Trev, I'll jump to you first this time, but really as we start to talk about the notion of creating that environment, or even just starting with the language of changing our thinking from getting employees engaged to creating the environment in which employees engage, and why you chose, we chose, but in your wording chose to use the language of you can't motivate your team. Maybe we'll start there because we really have to change that belief before we can change our actions on that. So Trev, thoughts on that?
Yeah, regularly we get asked to, come talk to my team, motivate them, inspire them. And basically the answer is, listen, I can't actually do that. Like I can't come and put that in somebody. I can't put motivation in you or inspiration in you. And because that's an inside job. And so, right, if you're trying to grow a plant, you can't actually do much about the plant, but you can start to say, how do I get more sun, more water, better soil, all the contextual environmental things, right? And in that sense, this is what we're talking about. It's the fact that you cannot motivate someone, but you can do a whole bunch of things to help them light up themselves, to motivate themselves. And the story I sometimes tell is, one of my kids, Oscar, when he was little, we were having our piano retuned, and just as he was getting it redone, the guy who was tuning it, he would hit a tuning fork, and he would get my kid to go find the corresponding string that would vibrate from across the room. And I think motivation works like that. Is we can tell a story, we can provide an insight, we can give a perspective, and it can light up something that's inside someone. But we can't actually put that in there. We don't say, let's add the motivation string to you there. Now you're good to go. The challenge is sometimes like the strings get all covered in stuff and they're not vibrating very well. And I think that's a case where we as leaders need to help remind people and realize what's important to them. We'll talk about some of the specific actions, but this is why the contextual part is everything, because I can't make you feel motivated. I can try and light up things that are already inside you or speak to things that are meaningful to a person. But I think that's where we need to really, really start, is to say, how can we create a context where we do that? And so much of it, there's some very tactical things organizationally we can do. So much of it, though, around how we're interacting and reframing and transforming the relationship and how we're interacting with our team. Because in some ways it's a relief. It's like, oh, thank God, I don't have to motivate them. Not my job. And it's not, it's their job. But it means we have another job, which is to now craft this context. And I think that's what we'll look at today, is to say, okay, how do we help do that? And probably, if I can start with one of the most potent ways to do that is through meaningful, just stress that word a little bit, meaningful involvement of your team, right? There's a notion, comes out of the training we do around team performance. There's an element where basically the expression is, if people have a chance to weigh in, then they will buy in. So it doesn't mean that they're going to decide, but if we give them a meaningful voice where we're really listening, and so that if they say, well, I think we should do this, thanks, and just move on to someone else, that's not really listening, right? To take a minute and say, what do you mean? How would that work? What effect do you think that would have? Okay, that's interesting. So that they know that we're actively trying to understand that. Even then, if we make a different decision than the one that they suggested, their likelihood of buying into what we're doing organizationally, it's not buying into our choice, it's buying into where the organization is going, goes way, way up. So we need to keep finding ways to have those meaningful conversations where we are genuinely listening. And sometimes that means we have to change how we look at people and say, okay, am I really listening to this person deeply? Because if not, why would they be engaged if we're not?
I love the use of that language of meaningful. It's you truly, as the leader, have to want to hear from your team on significant issues. If really I'm getting them to weigh in on what color the paper cups are going to be in the office, right? Versus I'm really inviting weigh in on the direction of the organization or on key decisions where they can truly feel like what they are sharing matters. There's a big difference between that. Maybe Eric, a bit more unpack that idea of meaningful.
Yeah, I think think of just how polarized our society has become in recent years, right? It used to be, don't talk about religion and politics. Now it's don't talk about religion, politics, vaccines, trucker rallies, you name it. People polarize almost instantly to one or other end of the spectrum. And now it's on, let's talk about return to work. Like that's now the new polarizing issue. And we have everything from organizations that are saying, hey, you never have to come back, to organizations that are threatening, you don't come back, you don't have a job. If we're talking about meaningful, let's talk about what matters, and let's talk about what matters in real time. I think sophisticated leaders will engage their team in conversations around this. It doesn't mean you're just going to cave and give people everything they want. Sometimes people don't understand the impact of certain decisions because they're not the business owner. They don't have the full picture. But if one is willing to enter into the fray and listen and engage in meaningful discussion around what this might look like and what a new reality might look like for us as a team, that's where you'll get the buy-in. Most people want a solution. I tell you this, I know of organizations that are using threats, right, to try to get their people back. And that may work short term, right? But fear is never a good source of motivation long term. People will register the threat and may line up temporarily until they find a better opportunity. And I can guarantee you that one of the negotiating chips moving forward will be how I come to work. This is now the new normal, and it's something that people have gotten too used to give up. So I think, if we're going to talk about meaningful, if we want to talk about them buying in or weighing in on important issues, giving them a voice on what this looks like, as opposed to just mandating certain conditions that they may or may not be able to meet those conditions anymore, given how their lives have been redefined over the last 2.5 years. And I think we need to remind ourselves of that. I think when we talk about creating meaningful conversations, I read in a book recently that talking about leaders, that sophisticated leaders face reality with increasing maturity. Face reality with increasing maturity, right? So we've got to be making sure that we're actually dealing with reality and not some romanticized construct from the past of it was so great way back when. Face it, you had problems then too. Okay. Right? And so facing reality is saying, here's the context, here's the conversation we need to have, here are some options we can entertain, let's figure this out together. And I think in a situation like that, I get that sometimes that won't always be possible, but certainly that would be the preferred approach, where you give people a voice, where they feel truly heard and valued. That is what makes them stay. Not just a boost in salary, I'm afraid.
I love what Catherine, what you added in the chat window about the notion of that active listening. How we get people to weigh in as well is going to be critical. Just sending out an email or a survey is not inviting people to weigh in. It will require gathering, whether it's remotely or in person, but it will require having those environments where the team comes together and has healthy dialogue and conversations and discussions around core issues of the business. And the more that you can invite that kind of input, where, to what Catherine's point is there, where you are actively listening in those environments, you're a part of those environments, but it is an opportunity for your team to discuss and to unpack business fundamentals, key concepts within the business, strategies, all of that stuff. That's where this is really going to come to play. And I love what you said, Eric, and maybe we'll move this into the second part of kind of where we're at with this. Not only do we need to create environments where teams can weigh in, but we talked about the notion of, and you said this, about really addressing the reality of what's happening. And I think about, and we were joking about this the other day as we were prepping for our webinar today. It came to mind for me is that some business owners right now with their teams, where they're going in just going rah, 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 everything is great, everything is perfect. It's a little bit like that Monty Python skit where they're kind of going, it's just a flesh wound. And right as they're being chopped up and you're continuing to try to say, listen, everything's fine, everything's great. It's not fine. It's not great. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know. The experts are predicting recession and this and that. Well, we need to talk about those things with our teams. Our team members are feeling the stress. They're feeling burnt out. They're feeling all these things. Don't avoid having those conversations with your team. Open up and talk about them. Maybe both of you, I guess I'll, Eric, maybe you started to talk about this with that quote that you just gave, but maybe address a little bit more of this notion of the realistic approach to conversations with our team.
Well, let's face it, you can't just come out and share all the facts about your business with your team. You've got to exercise some discernment there and some judgment. But I think we try to avoid the issues. And I think avoiding the issues is almost like we're all fed up with this, aren't we? Like, we're tired of talking about COVID. We're tired of talking about the pandemic and what it's cost us, financially, what it's cost us emotionally, mentally. Socially, like it's taken up so much space over the last 2.5 years that it would be so easy to say, forget about it now, that we don't have a lockdown, let's just go. But I don't think that's wise. I think there needs to be a balance between, yes, painting a picture of the future and moving on. But when you talk about grieving, I think like our entire society is going to be grieving this thing for a while. And its impact on us. And how do you actually move beyond grief? Well, you actually have to talk about it. You actually have to face it. You can't just bury it and hope that, it doesn't rear its ugly head again. And so I think using discernment and judgment, at least at the leadership, the middle management level, to talk openly about these issues and what managers are hearing from their team. What are the themes? What are the threads? What are the concerns, the fears, the questions? Those conversations need to be had at that level so that as a leadership group, you can begin to steer the organization the right way. I've challenged some of my leaders, they're like, okay, lockdowns, is no longer around. That's it. Now this year, we're going to grow our revenue by 3 times. And I'm like, with a workforce that is ready to fall over. Come on. You've got to face reality with increasing maturity. And sometimes that means this is going to be a fallow year. We're not going to hit perhaps. And I know business leaders don't want to hear that. And the hyper optimistic don't want to hear that. But again, facing reality. What are we actually, can we push ourselves? Yes. But do we need to be conscious of what reserves we're actually working with and where our people and our leaders are at? I was talking with a leader, a major department of the federal government, and they're like the person in charge, and she's worn out, and she's trying to hold up her DGs that are all worn out, and they're basically one day at a time right now. And I get that not every organization has been impacted that way, but I think it's safe to say that this has cost us tremendously when it comes to our emotional, our mental well-being. And we just need to be conscious of that. And I would add to this that, I think the organizations that are really savvy, really sophisticated, they know that we're about to see probably the greatest mental health crisis we've ever experienced in our lifetime on the back end of this thing. And again, I don't want to be like a doomsayer here, but let's again face reality. The professionals are saying it. The entire mental health and wellness industry is saying it. It's already flooded. Try to get a therapist right now. Right? There's months of waiting lists ahead of you. I mean, this is really serious. And it's not just going to be throwing an odd wellness webinar at your team or bringing in someone to do yoga maybe once. Like, yoga's great, don't get me wrong, or bringing in a nutritionist. I think the organizations that are really savvy, really smart, are actually looking at how they do business, and they're integrating wellness into the business model, not as something they do from time to time. They're recognizing their people need it, and their people are going to continue to need it. And so it's now part of how we do things around here. Right? They're even appointing people that are like in charge of wellness for the organization. Like, they're creating roles around this stuff in a way that we really haven't seen before, except in real savvy organizations that knew this and understood the importance of this, pre-COVID. So these are important conversations that need to be had. We need to be facing reality with increasing maturity. We need to be creating the conversation and using discernment, obviously, as to who we involve in that conversation and how much information we share. But it needs to happen. It needs to happen.
The gym where I work out is we do a bunch of high intensity workouts, and one of the things they'll do before they start the stretching and the cool down, the first thing they have you do is everybody stops and they practice breathing, and you do 3 or 4 just deep breaths in and out, and it's just to kind of remind your body that you're at this place. And a lot of organizations are in a stage right now where they just need to remind their team, let's just take a second and breathe. Take a deep breath, and now we can kind of start to look at, where are we going, what are we doing, and begin that next step. But we're so quick to want to move on from that. Trev, maybe unpack that a bit.
Sure. As I was breathing deeply on my sofa, where yes. I know you're doing the high intensity training.
I know.
Made me think about there's a key element of resilience here. Right? It's the capacity of your team members, of your organization, to bounce back, right? Resilience is usually a measure of time. How long until you bounce back to what you were before? That question from a business perspective, for me, it's a little uninspired. I think a more interesting question is how do you bounce back stronger? Right? That's a good, healthy response to a situation. Because if we just go back to where we were, then maybe we're not learning, we're not growing. But when we've been going through all of these things layered on top of each other, people are worn out, right? And I think this is where, to Eric's point, good leadership describes the current reality extraordinarily well, in a way that it doesn't overinflate it, doesn't underinflate it. It just says, listen, this is where we are. Because until we're clear about where we are, you can't make any clear plans about where you're going. Right. If you're not being honest about where you're starting, then any plans you set are going to be out of whack as well. And so we have to be able to do that. When we think about resilience, very often what we found was organizations were not prepared to weather a storm like this. Some did better than others. But a lot of them were not ready. And it's interesting because there's great business reasons why, right? There's this notion of capital effectiveness or your capital efficiency, right? So it's looking at the ratio between every dollar you spend on increasing your revenue and how much you get. Okay, so if you spend $1 on marketing and you get $1 back, your ratio is 1-to-1. If you spent $1 on furniture, you'll get 0 back. That's a 1-to-0. That's not good. Don't do that. I'm not saying don't buy furniture, but but if you're able to, put up a billboard, if that's still a thing, right? And you spend $1 on that and you get $10 back, that your ratio is 1-to-10. And so it's always about growth. And this is good business growth. We like that. But there's a point where you hit profitability. And when profitability shows up, there's another dimension you have to take into account. You don't just keep focusing on growth. You need to look at, how do I protect my profit? Right? And this is where we do things like deepen the relationships with our existing clients, use contracts to extend our relationship. Like, there's a host of things we can do to protect our profit. The challenge is the behavior we're used to is spending on growth. And here's a great example of growth spending that we all look at and go, yeah, it's a great idea, until it's not, which is just-in-time shipping. There are no warehouses. No one has those. They're all in ships and trucks. And you say, so investors love it. This is real capital efficiency. We don't have to have any of that stuff. We've got it all in motion. This is beautiful. But the moment it stops, right? The moment there's an interruption, the moment a boat goes sideways in the Suez Canal, right? Like, all of a sudden trade around the world stops, and the capacity of organizations to adapt to that, that was a real struggle. They're very, very brittle. So we have to look and say, how do we invest to protect our profit? And that comes to investing in our team. Our team delivers our profit. Their ability to be able to sustain their performance and their productivity, to feel connected, engaged, motivated, whatever that's going to be, is a key element. And this is when you do buy a chair, right? Because you go, what are you comfortable in? Let me get you that. Right. And not, well, listen, we've got one standard chair for everyone. It's what do you need? Like, that is a very thoughtful way to go about it. But part of our role as leaders here is to look very clearly at what's happening around us and then find suitable language. And the language matters. I had a client recently, he had a star performer on his team leave. And he called me and he was panicked. He goes, I said, like, when you see this, what do you see? He goes, this is devastating. It's catastrophic. I thought, that's interesting. And I said to him, I said, when did your spidey sense first go off that she was at risk? Oh, probably 6 months ago. I'm like, that's interesting. I said, so the only reason this is catastrophic or devastating is because 6 months ago you had an inkling and really you haven't done anything about it. I said, second, as business issues go, this is a boring one. And I always say it's boring because everyone leaves. Everyone, absolutely everyone. I don't care if you own it, founded it, or the newest person, everyone leaves. And he was devastated by the fact that a really high performer who's desirable in the marketplace, who he knew 6 months ago was going to leave. But what we needed to do, because he now had to communicate this to his team, was to reset the language and to help people understand, listen, we know everyone leaves. We know it's a hot market right now as well. And that's going to be tempting for some. Not everyone's in the same situation. Because his worry was there's going to be a flood of exits because this person left as well. It's just to describe what is and not to over describe it or under describe it, but get grounded in reality as we work our way through it. And then also look and say, what can we do to protect our profit, which is our people? How do we ensure that we are protecting our ability for them to perform and to feel connected to what we're doing here?
So that's a connection. Sorry, Rob, but that sense of connection is so important. And when we talk about creating the conversation, let's talk about some models that are working and some that are not. There are organizations that are letting people choose when they come to the office and how often. That's not very effective. Because the whole notion is, well, if they can come to the office at least part of the time, then they can come in, they can collaborate with their peers, and then they can work from home the rest of the time. Problem is, without coordination, no one's in the office at the same time. You still end up on Zoom all day, right? Because half your workforce is at the office, half your workforce is at home, not very effective. Organizations that are trying to force the move back to work, they're finding a lot of resistance. What we've discovered is the organizations that are getting real strategic around this. And through conversation with team members are saying, these are the days where we require you to come in, or we require you to come in for team meetings. They bring everybody in to actually collaborate, not just come to the office and sit at their desk and plug away at their work. They can easily do that from home. Bring them in to do things that you can't do very effectively or as well remotely. So these are the organizations that are doing that. They're also going back to treating team meetings as a non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. Effective team, regular, disciplined, regular, good, engaging meetings. Why? Because they recognize this is the sticking power. People need to feel like they belong to a team, that they're part of a bigger conversation. And what's interesting is when push comes to shove, although effective meetings are a foundation, they're like fundamental to a high performing team, they're often the first thing to go when things get busy or crazy, right? We cancel the meeting, cancel the team meeting, and no, I don't know about you guys, but coaches that are on this call, I've often asked, like, so how often does your team get together? Oh, well, we're supposed to meet monthly. And I said, well, what's the last time you had a monthly meeting? Oh, 8 months ago. I said, so you don't have a monthly meeting then. Like, let's talk brass tacks here. What's actually happening in the organization? If you are not creating a place for engaging conversations around these issues, and around just daily operational strategic issues, coordinating your team, reinforcing values, reinforcing culture. Let's face it, if you're going to require them to come back to the office, that's where you're probably going to get the best return on investment for your time in. Not forcing them to come back so they can sit in a cubicle, do the very same work they could do from home, and probably do it more effectively from home because they didn't have to commute for 2 hours, right? Like it's just thinking this stuff through. If you're going to require them to come back for something engaging, meaningful, purposeful, deliberate, not just so that you can, check the box that, yeah, they showed up at the office this week.
It really does require putting the work and the effort into making sure that the meetings are, again, as you said, very strategic, very purposeful, and that's the work of the leader. The leader, one of the ways I think that you provide an environment for people to be engaged is you create meetings in which engagement is welcomed, where it is deliberate and they know exactly what it is they're engaging about. It's been fascinating to see. There's a great book that talks about the notion of teams as being like a couple dancing. Right. The leader and the follower. We put a lot of emphasis on leadership. Most organizations put almost no focus on how to create good followers in an organization. Right. And the more you can put and be strategic with, because most of the people in your organization will be followers, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad word. They will be followers. They will learn. They need to learn. You need to help them learn how to be good followers so that they might support the leader through that engagement. And part of that is creating an environment of meetings that allows for that. So I think that's a great
image,
start.
Rob, is like, instead of a graceful exchange between two partners on the dance floor where one is leading and the other is following that leadership, it's more like one partner's dragging the other person across the dance floor and calling it a dance, right? Like it's learning, how do we do this better? How do we support one another? How do we truly engage with each other? And again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but it's have the conversation, talk about what's impeding that, talk about the things that might encourage that. Use your team meeting, a segment of it, to check in with your people. Check, how are we doing, guys? Don't just assume because they're showing up and productive that they're okay. Because a lot of folks are just burying themselves in the work right now, running on fumes. And I think we're going to be surprised. Many will be surprised down the road to find some of their leaders aren't doing so well. I was working with an organization that says, well, hey, we let them go on stress leave. Well, that's fantastic. If they need it, let them go on stress leave. What support are they getting? or are they just hitting the pause button only to re-enter with all the same baggage they exited with? Right? Again, savvy organizations are thinking about this stuff and really getting strategic around not just creating an ongoing conversation, but what support does our team need right now, and what's it going to need near medium term here to really get through this whole thing.
So action, kind of first step of action is creating those new conversations, having new conversations with your team that are, again, raw, true, open, honest. Trev, I'm going to turn to you in a second. What would be a next action item? And I'm just being aware of the time here as we start to move into these ideas. What are some things that people can do to create that environment in which engagement or motivation happens? Trev, over to you.
We've talked about being more strategic. So what do we mean? You have to tap into direction, to vision, to mission, to goals. It is staggering how often I will meet with leaders or senior executives, and among the first questions I always ask is, tell me the goals of what are you accountable to deliver, or what are the organization's goals? And the odds of them getting that right are very low in my experience so far. Maybe I don't have a large enough sample. I accept that. But for the most part, people don't know. And so we expect them to be engaged and aligned and motivated when they don't even know what we're doing. Right. And so it's reminding them over and over about what are we here to do. And this goes to the element of meaning. You want people to be motivated, give them work that matters, right? Connect them to activities and things that matter to them, that, remind them why they got started, go back to why they joined the organization and show them how it's grown and how they've grown and where we're going next, right? Again, it's that leader helping to tell the story about where are we and what's happening, but it has to be based in clarity around our vision, our mission, our goals, right? Our values create the framework in terms of how we do it. That helps. I always think of them as guardrails for our behavior. So they stop us from crashing in a fiery ditch and instead just bump us back onto the road. But I think these directional pieces are critical, and there's so much fog in organizations right now. People, do I come in or don't I? What's it going to look like? What does this mean? Where are we hiring? What's our relationships now? How's our supply chain change? How's my role change? All of these, so much is in flux that our teams need to really get clarity. And without clarity, it's really hard to get somebody engaged and motivated because they don't know what you're talking about. Or it's so dissociated from what's going on around them. It's hard to know why. Why do I need to do this? What do I need to bring to this? Right. So I think this is a critical piece to really bring as much clarity to our vision, our mission, our values, the directional goals. Like, why are we doing what we're doing? Why does this matter? Is a question people are going to keep asking the whole time. And we get to answer that.
And it's so interesting to me, and because this will sound almost maybe like I'm contradicting what you just said, Trevor. Because as much as we need to be clear,
say it, Rob. Don't say it.
I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. We're going to learn team dynamics, conflict right here. As much as we need the clarity, we also need to make sure that things remain a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
And by that, I talk about this idea that when you think about it, we want to be clear enough that people know the direction we're going, but fuzzy enough with our goals that we can adapt and shift based on whatever the unknown is around the next corner. And what we start to create the sense of, so very on tactical stuff, clear. On strategy, little fuzzy. Just enough that you can still see, but you're able to make some of those shifts and be able to adjust to some of those things. Eric, I think it was you that first introduced me to the idea of agile, your AQ as being the next big thing that people need to really adjust to within or understand within organizations.
Yeah, I mean, we're familiar with IQ, your intelligence quotient, and then EQ has been in the workforce now for a good 20 plus years in terms of your emotional intelligence. And it didn't take long for leaders to understand that they would hire someone with a higher EQ over IQ any day because smarts weren't good enough. You needed the ability to get along with people and understand how people work and function. And that continues to be a fundamental skill in a leader's toolbox is constantly improving their EQ. But AQ has become, in the last 10 years or so, highly sought after as your adaptability quotient, your ability to adapt quickly in changing times. Here's what's interesting. Before COVID was even a thing, the times we're living in now were referred to as the age of disruption. The age of disruption. And what is that talking about? The amount of change and disruption and flux that business and society is in, and the pace of change that we are experiencing. That was pre-COVID, right? Then COVID comes along and says, oh yeah, hold my beer. Right? And like changes everything in a very short period of time. So organizations, their ability to adapt. There's a category of organization that is known for being almost obsessed with its evolution. They're called learning organizations. These are organizations that their entire culture and even their operations are built on feedback loops and feedback systems and learning from mistakes and learning quickly, by the way, right? Like learning quickly and adapting, learning quickly and adapting. I mean, this is the world of lean startup. In lean startup, you got to fail cheap and fail fast. You can't afford to fail slow and fail expensive. You're not going to make it to market. So I think now organizations more than ever, when we engage in these conversations, what are we learning? What are we changing? How are we adapting? What are we modifying? What are we getting rid of? What are we starting? What are we going to stop doing? Like, these questions are more important than ever. Because people are looking to be in organizations that are not, again, yearning for yesteryear, but that are leaning into the new reality, leaning into the future and saying, here's what we've learned, here's what we'll continue to learn. And I love the idea of set and yet fuzzy, right? Here's the direction that we're moving in, but you know what? Here's what we think we're going to do, and we're going to lean into that, but that may change given whatever ball comes out of left field. We're just going to then adapt and adjust accordingly, right? I think that sends tremendous amount of confidence among staff and members of when they see a leadership team that is listening, paying attention, asking great questions, and responding in real time as best as possible. Right?
And that leadership team, that it's can I jump in, Rob?
Yeah, jump in, Trev.
Okay. The leadership is so critical. Ever see an unmotivated person try to motivate someone? Does not go well. Does not go well. It's a race to the bottom, really. Our first job is we have to model this. We have to live and lead by example, right? So we need to tap into what motivates us, and that doesn't mean we have to go and be happy, cheerful, bright all the time. It's not that. You need to be doing things that matter. You need to reconnect very personally with, why am I doing this? Because how on earth are you going to motivate or inspire someone else if you're not there? And this is where we have to be honest with ourselves as leaders. Say, where am I right now? Right. What do I need here? What's got to happen? Because there's a lot of leaders that are pretty bruised and battered right now, and need to heal and recover their way through this as well, so that they can bring the level of focus and clarity and direction that their teams need, so that they can find their clarity, right? And this is where the circumstances aren't in charge. We are. We just live in circumstances, and we have zero control over that. It's to exercise control over, to take action where we actually have control, right, as opposed to where we imagine we have control. I was chatting the other day about, who here has, I paid $2.24 for gas recently. How many conversations are you having with people about the price of gas? And it's a useful question, because outside of voting and maybe a couple letters or emails,
you should send a fax, Trev.
Send a fax. That's right. There's no power here. There's no leverage. There's no room to exercise control over this. And yet people are burning all kinds of time and energy on it. Right? Over and over and over, plowing the same field over and over, getting nowhere. It's a waste of energy. And so we need to be really clear about what do we have control over in the midst of all this, and exercise control. Because that's the other part. Sometimes we realize we have control, but we decide to ignore that and instead focus on complaining about things that we don't have control over, where we need to put our energy where we have power, where we can make an actual difference.
I want to, and Eric, I'm going to ask you to maybe just unpack for a minute a program that we're doing called Legacy Program, because I think it really does fit in well into this conversation around here. One last thing that I would suggest as being kind of an action step of something that we need to really be deliberate around is the pace in which we are doing all of this, and recognizing the importance of, as leaders, we set that pace. I got consumed, as many of us did. You'd binge different things when, during the pandemic, you'd end up binging TV shows or whatever. Well, I was binging everything CrossFit. Even though I've never been to CrossFit, I was binging the CrossFit games, even like that. And what you would see from some of the elite athletes that win year after year after year is they understand pace. They always see these rookies who come flying out of the gate, running and rushing, and they might win the first competition, but then they burn out. The smart leader knows to get a feel of the pace of their team, which requires them being deliberately involved with the team, figuring out what the pace of the team is, and then being the one, to your what you just said, Trev, about setting the example of setting the pace for the team. And it needs to be a sustainable pace. And the more that you can do that, the more effective you are at that, the more likely people are going to be engaged. We don't normally do a lot of self-promotion. I think this is a really good program that we've been developing. And so, Eric, maybe just unpack just in 2 minutes what we're talking about with the legacy.
Well, I mean, in reality, this is just us responding to the need that we're hearing from our clients. When it comes to having these conversations, we work with very gifted, very talented leaders who tell us all the time, I don't know how to do this. Like, this is not my area of expertise. And we're also hearing, plus, I'm exhausted, right? I'm struggling right now. And so we've launched a new program called the Legacy Program, and think of it almost like a group coaching experience, a professional development program, not limited to just leaders, but to their teams as well, where we actually facilitate conversations with leaders and their teams around what matters most in the organization right now. There's elements of training, there's elements of best practices, there's elements of coaching in there, but it's all, what does the organization need and how do we get everyone focused around this and come up with solutions together? So we're very excited. We've had a number of clients who've already sign me up. That's exactly what we need right now. And it also layering in, well-being and how to stay healthy during this time. Just being able to talk about these issues that sometimes as leaders, unless it's been an area of expertise for you, it's just outside your area of comfort. And so this is where I think we can come in and offer real value to any of our clients or folks that are saying, I think my team needs something like this. We just encourage you to reach out, have a conversation with us.
Yeah, and absolutely. And so, if certainly for those of you, if you're already connected to one of our coaches, if you're in a relationship with them, just send them an email and reach out to them, and they'll be happy to talk about it. If you're not yet connected to any of our coaches and you're really listening to this and want to know more information, you can see my email address is right there in my Zoom window, rob@rhapsodystrategies.com. Send me a note, and I'm happy to connect you with one of our coaches to talk about that and really unpack the notion of that legacy program. We started this call by talking about maybe one last thought from each of you, and thank you for all of your insight. We started this call looking at the context, looking at the situations, and feeling a little bit like it doom and gloom and bleak. I think that there really are some practical solutions to how you engage team. And maybe just a quick last final wrap thought. Trev, I'll start with you. Eric, we'll wrap it up with you before we close the call off.
I think, Rob, if I go back to the tuning fork metaphor, as leaders, it's in that sense, our job is to set the tone. And we need to start with ourselves first, make sure we're grounded in what matters. And then it's bringing that to every conversation, those directional pieces, that reminding people why we're here, what we're doing, why we're doing it, reconnecting them in a world that has been knocking them all over the place. So, and in that sense, it doesn't matter if they're at home or working from the office or a blend. What matters is their sense of connection to the work of the organization, and helping them do that. And then you start to say, okay, how do we do it together? And we can layer on these pieces, but it's that sense of connection to something meaningful here.
Yeah, Eric.
I would speak directly to the leaders on this call. There is no nobility in being a martyr. There is no honor in playing superhero. You don't have to do this alone. If you're one of those leaders that feels like you're on the margins right now, you've just been operating on fumes, reach out and get some help. Form a peer group, get a coach, get into a business group of some sort. The solutions will find themselves. We are all finding our way back, and we will find our way back. But trying to do that solo, it's unnecessary, and it can delay the healing. So encourage you, if you need to reach out, reach out. That's what takes the most courage, and that's what will net you the best results in terms of your own personal well-being.
5 or 6 years ago, Eric shared an insight with me that I thought was so brilliant that it couldn't have come from him. And so I used to quote the Harvard Business Journal as being the source of this until I realized it was actually Eric that was the one that created it. Your team is asking 2 questions. Does what I do matter? Does anyone care? They're asking them before the pandemic. They're asking them now. And the more you focus in on those 2 questions and you be the response person to those questions, the more your team will choose to be engaged, because they'll believe that what they do matters, and they will believe that you as the leader of that organization care. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I know it was a little bit different. We didn't have as much time to pull in everybody. And again, we apologize. Steve did mention something in the chat that I do want to highlight. He mentioned about a previous webinar that's around mental health. We've got a whole bunch of webinars on our website. If you go to rhapsodystrategies.com, look for the webinar tab, and there's a whole bunch of different webinars in there, and they all start better than this one did. And so do encourage you to go and check those out. And there's lots of great topics and certainly relevant topics even for today. We'll be sending out some information about our next webinar, which will be happening. Our goal this time is to do these quarterly. And so we'll look at doing another one in a few months' time. But thank you so much for spending the time with us, and do appreciate it and hope to hear from many of you.